So let me highlight what's unique about this course. Now, I've been doing this course for about 10 years, and I continually make adjustments to it. And the adjustments I make, I hope, continue to make it better and more relevant to the students who are taking this course. We live in a world that's becoming increasingly complex in terms of information. There's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of, as we know, misinformation out there. And it's becoming more and more difficult to kind of distinguish between right information and wrong information. All right, now, I'm going to be presenting to you economics, how economics discipline thinks about how the economy works. And I'm going to be presenting to you a century plus worth of knowledge that's been gathered about the economic system and how it works. But there's a lot of things in the way in which we teach economics, which is, it's kind of forced us or caused us to lose focus of some important elements about the economic system. And what I've been trying to do in the last 10 years or so is to reintroduce and bring some of those elements that have always been there, but have sort of fallen off the radar and have not been approached by the economics discipline in a very forthright way. So the first bullet point I have on this slide is the relevance of ethics in economics. And one of the things I'm going to highlight in this course, in a small way, it's just going to add on about 10% of extra material, is how ethical behavior is important for economic outcomes. And this is something, like I said, the economics discipline and most introductory textbooks don't touch. They've sort of put ethics aside and said, well, we don't need to think about ethical behavior. We just want to think about how the economy works. And ethics is something which is it's a choice. People make decisions about whether to behave well or not, but it's not necessarily connected to the economic system. That statement, I think, is wrong. Economics and ethics are tied to each other. Old economists, a century plus ago, knew that and wrote about that, but it's sort of fallen by the wayside in the economics discipline. So introducing it back into the system is going to be a very unique element of this course, and I think it's going to make it much more relevant and interesting and important to all of you. So that's one of the unique aspects of this course. The second aspect of this course that's unique maybe, but not too much, is going to be the focus on the economic method or model building. The economy out there is incredibly complex, and there is no way for us to put together a model, if you will, that describes everything that's going on out there. So instead, economists build simplified models, which are simplified economies, really, that we construct in our head or construct mathematically. And we try to understand how these very simple economic structures are likely to work. As a result of that, we can then make some inferences about what the real world looks like and how it actually works. But we're never actually modeling the real world exactly. We're always only getting close, having certain elements that correspond to what's happening in the world. Understanding the economic method, though, is going to be really important to interpreting the economic results. And here I want to emphasize a sort of a caution. I think a lot of folks come into, say, economics and other disciplines and basically think, I'm going to tell you how the world works, how the economy works. And you just need to learn kind of how things work. And it doesn't quite work that way. Instead, I'm going to tell you how to think about different aspects of the economy. And we're not always going to be 100% certain what's going to come about, but we're going to be able to understand what elements are important to make certain economic outcomes come about. All right, I'm going to give you an analogy, which I think is certainly relevant today. And I think I'll come back and I'll mention this a few times through the course. This past 6 months, we've been dealing with a very serious pandemic. And, you've all been listening to the news, and one of the things that we hear all the time is that we have to follow science. We have to listen to the science and make decisions based on that science. All right, now, some people, I think, interpret that to mean that what science is supposed to do is to tell us what's going to happen. So they look at the models, for example, that describe the spread of the virus throughout the country and the world. And some people focus on the fact that some of those models have been dead wrong. They're wrong. They've gotten the outcomes wrong. And they look at that and they say, oh, well, that shows that the science doesn't work, that we're getting it wrong. The models are not predicting the future perfectly. But that's where there's a misinterpretation of what the model's supposed to do. What the models, the epidemiological models, are doing is it's telling us different scenarios that may or may not come about based on sets of assumptions that they have plugged into the model. Now, if you plug certain assumptions in, you might get the virus spreading wildly. But if you plug in different assumptions, the model may tell you that the virus will not transmit so wildly. What's important to notice is that the model helps us make decisions about what to do, even when it doesn't predict perfectly what's going to happen. All right? And that's a good example of how science helps us and can be followed. But we shouldn't expect too much from science. We shouldn't expect that it's going to give us a perfect prediction of what's going to happen, because we don't know a lot of the elements in this virus, for example. We don't know exactly how fast it's going to transmit. We don't know how quickly it's going to mutate and change into various forms. We don't know exactly how deadly it's going to be and on which groups of people. All of those are unknowns where we're getting more information along the way, but we don't know for sure right now what the answers to some of those assumptions are. So that's something which I think is really important in economics, to understand the method of economics so that you understand how far we can push the evaluations and the analysis. They're not going to be perfect, and you have to learn how the method works in order to understand how to interpret the economic models. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time focusing on that, and in lecture 3 next week, we're going to be spending just a little bit of time thinking about that really hard. Now, a couple of other things I want to highlight. Number one, I'm going to be presenting material in this course in a very different order than other students that you may know in other principles of economics courses. And that's because I made a decision quite some time ago to introduce economic models from what I would call a level of lower complexity to greater complexity. So I'm going to start with what is the simplest explanation of an economy, the simplest model, if you will. And it's just going to be two people, Smith and Jones, coming together in a market and trading apples with each other. All right. And that is about the simplest aspect of that is an economy. Two people trading with each other, you know, two farmers trading some products with each other. That is the fundamental first step of an economy. We then break that out or expand upon that and imagine that we've got lots of different consumers that want to purchase a particular good. We've got lots of different producers that are willing to produce a particular good. They're coming together in lots of different markets and interacting with each other. And we're going to continually, through the course, increase the complexity of the markets so that we can understand how the models apply a little bit better. The effect of that is going to mean that we don't do supply and demand in this course until midway through. In fact, after the midterm is when we will fully get supply and demand discussed. In other economics courses, they're going to be introducing supply and demand to students next week. And I'm going to start working with that. But they will not have had, like you will, a full sort of explanation of all of the assumptions that have gone into making that supply and demand model work. All right, and you're going to see that from the ground up again. And so the order of presentation is going to be a little bit different than in other economics classes. Now, we're going to cover about 80% of what's going to be covered in another economics course. There's some things that I do, again, unique that are going to be different, but most of it is going to be very similar to what's being seen, but just like I said, in a slightly different order. Now, lastly, we're going to focus on market failures and government failures. So we're going to talk about markets and how they work, but we're going to talk about reasons why they don't work perfectly. And ethics is going to turn out to be one of those reasons, or misapplications of ethics, lack of ethics, can make markets fail. We're also going to be talking about government involvement, how the government affects economic outcomes, the reasons they may introduce or be involved in economic activities. Why do they put policies into place? What are the effects of those policies? But we're also going to be thinking about how do governments make decisions about what economic policies they should put into place or shouldn't. In the course of talking about markets and how they work and fail, we're going to be talking about government too, how it works and how it sometimes fails. And so that's going to be a focus at the latter half of the course. And then lastly, I want to highlight the fact that I think what I'm presenting, there's been a lot of discussion in the public sphere about universities, and that universities, this will come from the right especially, and on Fox News, where they'll talk about how universities are becoming a liberal bastion, that all of the professors are liberal, they're teaching their students liberal ideas, and conservative ideas are kind of pushed by the wayside. Quite honestly, I don't know if that's true or not true, but I can tell you from this course, that what I'm going to present is a very moderate ideology, if you will. My point of view comes from the middle. And whereas lots of folks on both sides, especially the extreme sides of the right and left in the United States, kind of point the fingers at others and talk about why everybody else is wrong, I'm going to be taking a slightly different approach and trying to highlight why observers on both sides are actually right. That there's a lot of smart people who are thinking about things on both sides of the ideological spectrum, and there's a lot on both sides that make a lot of sense. And we have to kind of cut into and think hard about where there's agreement and where there's disagreement to understand the differences that exist out there. So my course is going to give you tools that I think are going to give you abilities to, if you believe that you are on the left and you're sort of a progressive and that's your kind of leaning or beliefs right now, I'm going to give you the economic arguments that sort of support that particular position. But if you're on the right, more free market oriented, less government oriented, I'm going to give you the arguments that can be used on that side to justify those particular positions. And there are arguments on both sides. It is simply not the case, I would contend, that one side is right and the other side is wrong. Instead, both sides have elements of correctness and elements of incorrectness to their arguments. And I'm going to try to give you what the economics discipline can say about understanding those particular ideologies.